In this video, we're looking at variables affecting conformity. So we are looking at Asch's research here, and we're looking at the different variations that Asch conducted that differed slightly from his baseline. And he conducted these variations in order to test different variables or different factors that may influence conformity. So the factors that you need to know are group size, unanimity, and task difficulty. I'm also in this video going to introduce you to two other studies that are not strictly replications. They weren't conducted by Asch, but they are of interest to us. We are going to talk about them now, and we're also going to come back to them again later on in the social influence topic as well. So this is the checklist. These are the things that you need to be able to do. These are the things that you need to know for this topic. So I'd like you to complete your Asch predictions if you haven't already. So this is in your 1.2 section of your OneNote. What I would like you to do is consider whether in these variations the conformity would be higher than 32% or lower than 32%. And then I would like you to give a specific percentage guess, your best guess of whether you think conformity would increase or decrease. So for example, when there was one confederate, remember that in Asch's baseline there were 7 to 9 confederates. But when there's only one confederate, I think that the rate of conformity is going to be lower, and I think it's going to be 15%, for example. So I'd like you to complete that for the rest of the table. Pause the video, do that, and once you're done, come back. So we're looking at different variables affecting conformity. Variables are factors that might influence conformity. You would have come across that word variable before when you looked at the independent variable, the factor that you change or manipulate, or the dependent variable, the factor that you measure. So variables are just factors or things that you can vary. We're talking here specifically in this topic about situational variables. Situational variables are features of the situation or the features of the environment which affect the degree to which an individual conforms. These are different to dispositional factors. You might have heard somebody compliment your lovely disposition. That means that you've got a nice nature. That means it's to do with your personality. So we can explain conformity in terms of dispositional personality factors. But here, when we're looking at the variables affecting conformity, strictly, we are talking about the situational variables. What factors in the environment affect how likely it is somebody will conform to the majority? So Asch, in addition to his baseline study, which he conducted in 1951, he also conducted several variations of this study, each time varying one variable at a time. In total, he looked primarily at 3 key variables that are all shown to affect conformity: group size, unanimity, and task difficulty. So let's go through. Let's start with looking at group size, and let's see how Asch's findings align with your predictions. So in order to test group size, Asch simply altered the number of confederates. In his baseline, he had 7 to 9 confederates, and that resulted in conformity rate of 32%. On average, participants conform to 32% of those trials. So what happens when we alter the group size? We change the number of confederates. Asch found something really interesting. And if we look at this graph here, we can see some interesting things going on. We can see that conformity increases with group size, but only to a point. That point is around here. Once we get to 3 confederates, actually there isn't a significant effect on conformity. Once we get to 3 confederates, the conformity is around 32%. And that's the same as Asch found in his baseline study when there were 7 to 9 confederates. So this is really interesting. This means that actually the group doesn't need to be any more than 3 in order for group pressure to exist. Most people are really sensitive to the views of others. Just having 3 Confederates is enough to sway opinion. We don't need huge groups. We don't need really, really large majorities. Actually, just 3 Confederates is enough to have a significant effect on conformity. At the other extreme, we can see that actually, when the group size gets too large, for example, here, conformity starts to decrease. Now, why is that? Why might we see conformity begin to decrease when there are more Confederates, when we have 15 rather than 3 or 9? What's going on? At this point, I'd like you to pause the video and just provide an answer to that question. Why do we see conformity decrease when the group size gets too large? Pause the video, and then when you finish the answer to that question, you can resume it. The next variable that Asch investigated is unanimity. You would have heard the phrase unanimous before. If you are unanimous, then it means that you're united in your opinion. It means that every member of the group agrees. You are unanimous. So unanimity is testing whether the group is unanimous or not. And what happens when there isn't this united front? What happens when what happens when the Confederates don't agree with one another? Remember that in the baseline study, those 7 to 9 Confederates all said the same incorrect answer. That means that they were unanimous in their decision. What happens when they're not unanimous? So in order to test this, Asch introduced a Confederate who disagreed with the other Confederates. In other words, they were a dissenter. They were non-conforming. So we can call them a non-conformist. In other words, they're kind of like an ally to our real participant. Now, Asch wanted to see what happens when this ally, this dissenter, gave the correct answer. But also what was really interesting was when the dissenter, one of the Confederates, broke away from the group and gave a different incorrect answer. So they didn't agree with the group, but they still weren't correct. So, for example, here is our real participant. Here is our dissenter. The correct answer is A. So in this first variation, we would have the Confederates say C, A, C, 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 and then we would look to see whether our participant conformed. And in the second variation, we've got the same Confederate, but this time they give a different answer to the group, but that answer is still incorrect. What happens to conformity with our real participant? Asch found that conformity rates decline when the majority influence is not unanimous. As soon as that unanimity of the group is broken, conformity rates decrease. Why is this happening? First, let's have a look at the 2 different variations that Asch tested. In the first variation, this is where our dissenter or our non-conforming Confederate gave the correct answer. In this variation, conformity dropped from 32% in the baseline study to 5.5%. On average, participants conformed to the majority 5.5% of the time. Why? This gives the participant confidence in their own judgment. This confirms what they were going to answer in the first place. It gives them encouragement. It reassures them that they're correct, the group is wrong, and that answer that they had determined is right, and it was confirmed by the other person in the group. I think what's interesting is when the non-conforming Confederate gave a different incorrect answer. So they didn't agree with the group, but they were wrong. In this case, conformity still drops quite significantly, from 32% in the baseline to 9% when the Confederate gives a different incorrect answer. Why is this happening? Just having a non-conformist, even if they're not right, this appears to free the participant to behave more independently. It creates a new group norm of non-conformity. And we start to perceive cracks in the majority's unanimous view. So even when that Confederate gives a different answer, an incorrect answer, the fact that they have given a different answer to the group tells the participant that it's okay to go against the group. It's okay to not conform. It's okay to behave independently. And it creates this new culture or this new norm that dissenting or non-conformity is acceptable. So the final variable that was tested by Asch is task difficulty. So you might like to have a go at this. Which of these lines, very good, A, B, or C, is the same in length to our target line? Have a go. The correct answer is B. But this task was much, much harder compared to the original task that participants were required to do in the baseline study. So in order to make this task harder, Asch made the stimulus line and the comparison lines much closer to each other in length. We can see that it's much, much harder to tell now which of these is the same line as the target line. This makes it harder to accurately judge. And we find that conformity increases when task difficulty increases. Why is this happening? I would like you to pause the video at this point and to have a go at answering this question. Could ISI or NSI help explain why conformity increases as the task gets more difficult? Okay. Hopefully, what you identified is that ISI may be explaining conformity here. Now, what we see is that this is a more ambiguous task. It's actually less clear what is the right answer or not. And so we are unsure of the correct answer, and we look to the group for guidance. Maybe they have more information than we do. And for that reason, we maybe trust the group and we conform with their answer because we believe they are correct. So ISI can help explain why when the task gets more difficult, conformity rates increase. Asch didn't report the percentage here, so it's fine to just say it increases when task difficulty increases. That's absolutely fine. So here's the table. This is one that you should commit to memory. This is one that I'm going to test you on lots and lots. So make sure that you're putting in a real effort to remember these percentages. They go a really, really long way in your success in psychology. So there are 3 variables tested by Asch: group size, unanimity, and task difficulty. Strictly, they're the only ones that you're going to get asked about in any exam. But at this point, I just want to introduce you to another couple of studies or couple of variations that we are going to be learning about later on in this topic. So here is a replication study of Asch. So they performed an Asch-like task. Asch's study was in 1951. This study was in 1981, so it was 30 years later. It involved students from the UK. Remember that Asch's research involved students from the United States, and they were psychology students. Whereas in Perrin and Spencer's research, the students were from the UK rather than the US and were studying engineering, chemistry, or maths. So there are some slight variations here. If we compare conformity rates to the original, we see that conformity fell drastically. It was almost non-existent. I believe only 1 in 390 odd people actually conformed. So what's going on here? The question I would like you to answer is, do you think that this change in conformity is because it took place 30 years later? Or do you think it's something unique about the participants who took part in this research? Why do you think it's one or the other, or why do you think it could perhaps be both? So I'd like a little response to this question. The other study that I would like to introduce to you is this research by Bond and Smith. They conducted a meta-analysis. We're going to learn about meta-analyses in the research methods topic. A meta-analysis is an analysis of analyses. You might have heard the word meta-language. That means language about language. You might have heard of metacognition, which is thinking about thinking. So a meta-analysis is an analysis of analyses. So what this involved was the combining of the data from 31 studies. They all had a similar aim, they had similar methodology. So we combine all of their data into sort of one mega study where we were able to identify trends and patterns across all of these data sets. There were some very, very interesting findings. We saw cultural differences in conformity. Compared to Asch's original study, where we had average conformity of 32%, in Fiji, that was 58%. 58% on average conformed. In Belgium, it was much lower, at 14%. So the question is, what could be causing the different rates in conformity in these countries or in different countries in general? So again, I'd just like you to pause the video here at this point. And why might this be? So that's the AO1 for this topic. You need to know really this table. You need to know what Asch's findings were, but you also need to know how he investigated each of those 3 variables. How did he investigate task difficulty? How did he investigate unanimity? And how did he investigate group size? So that's it for now. You've got another couple of tasks to do. If you've got questions, you've got a teacher in the room with you, or you can just send me an email.